Hi everyone, I'm Jo Fry and this is my channel Jojo Fry Rocks, and today I'm going to be talking about the wildly exciting topic that is strings. I know that most of you will probably have your own preferences around things like string gauge and what different strings to use on different types of guitar, and I do as well. But that's one of the things that I want to address because I've seen a few things online recently that made me kind of reconsider, and because I've been playing a bit more than I have done over the last few years, I'm finding that actually I'm kind of shredding my fingertips quite a lot. There might be a few reasons for that, but I think string gauge might be one of the things that's playing into it. So potentially, am I making my life a little bit more difficult than it needs to be? Am I making it tougher to play some of the guitars that I've got because I'm maybe using a heavier string gauge than I perhaps need to? So I want to kind of delve into a few of these questions, particularly for a couple of reasons. The first reason is because I got a new guitar a couple of months ago. As you all know, if you've been watching this channel and following my progress, I got this Squire thin line Telly, and confession time, I bought this second hand, as you know, or you've probably seen, but I haven't actually changed the strings, which is a little bit yucky, isn't it? So I've actually got no idea how old these strings are. I think they're probably quite old. The guitar itself is only about 18 months old, but if they are the strings that came on the guitar when it was new, then yeah, they're quite old by now, and also someone else has been playing them, which is a bit icky, isn't it? But yeah, that I hold my hands up and completely confess to having been too lazy to change them, really. But also, I just loved it straight away, and I just wanted to start playing it straight away. So I just got straight on with it. But and I haven't really been able to put it down. But actually, I think the time has come to reassess and maybe change them. And I've also kind of found that they're a little bit lighter than the strings that I have on my other guitars. Now, I don't know what gauge they are, or what kind of company made them, but they're definitely different from the type of strings that I would usually play. So I'm interested and intrigued as well to get some advice about what might be the kind of optimum type of strings or string gauge for a semi-hollow guitar like this one, or does it actually make any kind of difference? So that's the first one that I wanted to look at and change, because that's probably the most urgent one that I need to address. But the other one that I want to look at is the RG550. Now, I've sort of talked about some of the difficulties that I have getting along with this guitar, and I think that I've probably got the wrong kind of strings on it, and that might be kind of causing me some issues. I get quite a lot of fret buzz on this guitar. There it is. So that's even kind of at the 3rd fret there. The string just isn't clearing the frets. I do have the action set very low on this guitar, and because that's, you know, usually the way that you would set up a guitar with a Floyd Rose. But I think that perhaps because I'm using a hybrid string gauge, so I tend to just put top light, bottom heavy D'Addario strings on all of my guitars. Perhaps those heavier bottom strings, particularly the E string, it might just be physically too thick, and I might be, you know, causing myself some issues in trying to play this guitar with such heavy strings, when I feel like the whole sort of ethos and spirit of the Ibanez RG guitars is meant to be, they're meant to be shreddy, fast playing guitars. So probably tens, or even a set of tens would probably be kind of less than ideal on a guitar like this. So I wanted to just kind of get some insight into, you know, whether a guitar like this would benefit from a lighter string gauge, and whether that will affect things like tension on the neck, tuning stability, and all those kind of things, or whether that doesn't matter because it's got a Floyd Rose anyway. So I'm just curious, really. I'm string gauge curious. I just want to kind of see whether there are better options, and I wanted to get some professional advice. So I popped into town to speak to my friends in Life Guitars, and this is what they had to say. I'm here in Life Guitars again in Exeter with John.
Hey.
Morning, John.
Morning.
To talk today about the topic of guitar strings, which I know is something that sounds a little bit boring, but actually I think it's super interesting, and I would like to find out more about it, and particularly find out where am I going wrong with the strings that I've got on my guitars, and what can I do to improve it, and what should I be doing, and what considerations do I need to be thinking about when I'm getting strings for my guitars?
Yeah.
So the first guitar that I'm going to look at is my RG 550, which I have brought with me. And as much as I love it, I think I've said before on my channel that I have problems, I struggle to play this guitar. And I think one of the reasons is probably because of the strings that I've got on it. So at the moment, these are a hybrid set. They are top light, bottom heavy strings, which go from 10 to 52. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think that's making my life a little bit more difficult than it needs to be. So I'm here to get some expert advice.
Yeah, no worries. So you're in standard tuning at the moment, aren't you?
I am, and I tend to be in standard tuning most of the time.
So a lot of times people will pick a string gauge with a heavier bottom string, like you've got the 52. Normally, not all the time, but normally a lot of people will be using those strings for a drop tuning. So it's very common to have a thicker lower string here if you're going into like drop D or something like that, or even just taking the whole tuning down a little bit. So that could be causing you a little bit of problem. If it's not very comfortable for you, it might be that there's too much tension on the strings.
I definitely feel like there is, and
Yeah.
also because the action of this guitar is pretty low, I feel like with the thicker strings on the bottom, I get a little bit of fret buzz.
That could be a number of different things, not just the string gauge. Could be a multitude of different things. I think the other thing to consider is the scale length. So this would be a 25.5-inch scale length.
Yeah.
And typically, you think of things like Fenders, 25.5-inch
Yeah,
scale
like
length.
a strap. Yeah.
They get shipped with 9s, which is a lighter gauge of string because of the slightly longer scale length. If you think of something,
longer scale length means
so there's going to be more tension.
more tension. Right.
So if you have the same gauge of strings
Yeah.
on a 25.5-inch scale length as you do on a 24 3/4, which is, think of things like Gibsons, Epiphones, stuff like that, you'll find there's more tension on the longer scale length because the string you've got from this point to this point is a greater distance. There's more tension for that string to get up to pitch.
Right.
That's why typically Squires, Fenders, they ship with 9s. Epiphones and Gibsons ship with 10s. You're generally
So having again that sort of those heavier bottom strings particularly might be under a lot more tension. Yeah.
Which isn't a problem. A lot of people do like a heavier gauge of string. I know a lot of people who will change the strings as soon as they buy a Fender. They'll take the 9s off and they'll put 10s on because they prefer a thicker gauge of string. This is the whole thing with string gauge. There is no right or wrong. It's just down to personal preference. And I think it's one of those things where for maybe beginner guitarists or for a guitarist who's getting used to a new guitar, taking advice from other people on what string gauge is best is a great start. But at the end of the day, every guitarist is going to kind of stumble their way through different string gauges and find what works for them.
The only reason I use the top light, bottom heavy strings, and this is kind of quite embarrassing probably, but is because do you know Dan Hawkins from The Darkness?
Yeah.
I read an interview with him about 20 years ago, and he said
those are strings
that he uses.
I mean, if it's right for him, it's right for anyone.
That's why I've used them for 20 years.
Equally, it's a good point to make though, because he generally plays Gibson Les Pauls.
He does, yes.
Short scale length.
Yes, he does.
So there's that argument. You could always argue that the equivalent gauge of string on a longer scale length is probably going to be like a 9 or a 9.5.
I didn't even know that you got 9.5. I didn't know they came in halves.
So you can get 8, 8.5, 9, 9.5, generally up to 10.5, and then when you hit 11, for the most part, it then just goes up in single gauges.
See, that's completely a new one on me.
It creates a nice in between. There are a lot of people with. It's again, prime example is Gibson Fenders, sorry, with the longer scale length. Some people find that the 9 is too slinky. 10s are a bit too much tension, so just a nice gap in between 9.5. And then on Gibsons, they might think that 10s are too light, 11s are too thick. So 10.5 is a nice medium.
I might try some of these 9.5s, on here.
You don't tend to find that the lower strings really change that much. It's generally just the higher strings. But yeah, you can. There's a multitude of options in terms of string gauges.
I don't like to change these too often because of the Floyd Rose. I really can't be bothered. It's just lazy, I know. But I definitely feel like 9.5s might be an option here.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Cool. All right, let's look at the other one. My second guitar that I want to have a look at is the newest guitar I have in my collection, which I bought only a couple of months ago. It's my Squire Thinline Telly. And I bought this second hand, and I haven't actually changed the strings, which is a bit gross. And I don't know how old they are, and I would like to change them, but I don't actually currently know what's on there. I don't know what gauge they actually are. They feel quite light, and I think that conversely with this one, I might want to put maybe something slightly heavier on there, but I'd be interested in getting your advice on what works best, because this is a slightly different guitar. Obviously it's semi-hollow, so is there something about that you might need to use different strings for? So
in terms of the semi-hollow argument, I wouldn't say there's any preferable gauge of strings. B.B. King used 8, so he kind of goes against the grain of people saying thicker strings are better.
So it's not necessarily more resonant having thicker strings.
No. The one thing with string gauge, and I've kind of alluded to it already, is personal preference and how comfortable it is for you to play.
So these feel a little bit like cheese wire, but it could just be that they're quite old and a bit.
Possibly.
Yeah.
They feel like they could be 9s. So if you find they're a bit too slinky, you might want to try 10s. They'll bring up the tension a little bit. It's the same scale length as your Ibanez.
Right. Yes, because obviously it's a Fender.
But it might feel slightly different because it's a hardtail. There's no Floyd Rose there.
Yeah. Yeah, that was another thing actually I was going to ask about, like tuning stability, because I don't know whether it's a myth, but you often hear that like lighter strings aren't as good for tuning stability, for example.
I would say it's more down to the setup of the guitar.
Right.
The gauge of the string won't necessarily have a huge effect on tuning stability. It's more to do with, is your nut cut correctly? Are your saddles correctly looked after and set up, intonated, positioned? Sometimes the saddles can wear over time, and sometimes that can cause some problems.
This one looks all right, but I think this whole guitar is only about 18 months old. It's
the
quite
other thing
new.
as well to consider is the break angle over the nut. That can have an effect.
So this one is pretty straight over the nut. Yeah.
The tuners themselves, obviously, if they're either budget tuners or if they're old tuners that have just worn over time, there just tend to be more reasons for intonation and tuning stability issues than the strings themselves. It could also be, if the strings are quite old, that's also going to cause you some problems.
I would bet, I mean I don't know because I didn't ask the guy that I bought it from, but I'm willing to bet that these are the strings that came on the guitar.
Possibly. They don't look overly old, but they've definitely been played quite a bit. But yeah, and that can have an issue. That can cause an issue, with tuning stability.
Okay, so typically then these would probably be 9s if they're the ones that came on the guitar, and they do feel quite thin, probably slimmer than I would normally play.
Right.
So do you think that, for example, 10s would be okay on this guitar?
Yeah. The only thing to note when you're changing guitar string gauges, as you increase the tension on the string, you're gradually putting more tension on the neck. So the one thing to look out for, and if you're not comfortable doing it yourself, it's the kind of thing that's great to take to a shop to help out with. But as the tension increases on the neck, it's going to pull the headstock this way,
right,
and it's going to create what we call a bow in the neck, and that can cause a higher action. It can cause intonation problems. You can get some fret buzz in certain places depending on how it's bowing. So if you're changing the string gauge, you do encounter some problems, definitely take your guitar to your local guitar store. Generally, I mean, for example here, if someone brings a guitar in and they've changed the strings and they've got an issue with the truss rod, if it's just a quick tweak, your guitar shop's not going to charge you for that. They'll literally just have a quick look over the neck, tweak it, straighten it out, away you go. Absolutely.
That is not something that I would do myself at home because I don't have a truss rod adjusting tool, but I just wouldn't trust myself to not damage the guitar. Always best to get it sorted professionally. All right. Thanks very much, John.
That's all right.
Lovely to speak to you.
Yeah, no worries. Enjoy.
Cheers. Great advice there from John in Life Guitars. I feel like I've learned a few things, primarily about string gauge and the relationship to scale length, for example, which is something that I hadn't really thought too much about. So the fact that that relationship between kind of lighter or heavier gauge strings and the tension that you get depending on the different scale length of the guitar that you're using kind of has a different effect. I'd never really considered that before, so I feel like I've learned something, and also kind of busted a bit of a myth, I suppose, around the tuning stability, which I always thought was a thing. I always thought that lighter gauge strings are more likely or more easily put out of tune, or just, go out of tune. They don't hold the tuning as well. Whereas there are so many other different factors that actually affect tuning stability on a guitar, that string gauge doesn't really make a difference to that at all. So I will be trying out a set of 9.5s. Now I know that they exist. I'm really intrigued. So I'm going to get some of those, try those on the RG550, see how it feels, see what it sounds like, see if it helps to eliminate some of that fret buzz. And I will definitely be changing the strings on the thin line. Probably try a set of 10s on there. And one other thing that I asked him off camera was about brands of strings. And I guess they're all much of a muchness, really. But it's even more so than I realised, because I always use D'Addarios. I've always used them. I was planning on getting some Fender strings because I'd heard a lot of people say that they're really, really good. And apparently D'Addario make Fender strings. So I probably wouldn't have found a great deal of difference. But there we go. So I hope that was a little bit useful. It certainly was enlightening for me anyway. And I'm gonna get changing those strings now. Okay, thanks everyone.